Let me take you back to a night I'll never forget. It started out like any other evening, but by the time dawn finally crept over the trees, I wasn't the same. This story isn't just something I heard or read somewhere, it's something I lived, step by step, in a way I wouldn't wish on anyone. So picture this, an old manor, the kind you see in stories, with creaking floors, winding hallways, and rooms that hold memories of people long gone. I wasn't there out of curiosity, I'll tell you that. I was summoned, and I wish now that I'd turned away the moment I saw that place rising from the mist, with its dark windows staring out like eyes. The family history I'd tried to ignore all my life finally caught up with me that night. You see, the manor wasn't just a house. It was more like a web. A trap that took something from everyone who stepped inside. Now, I can see some of you might be thinking, if it was so bad, why didn't you just leave? And believe me, that's exactly what I thought at first. But once you're inside, leaving isn't as simple as it seems. Strange things started happening almost as soon as I walked through that door. Shadows moving in the corners of my eye, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. It felt like the house had been waiting for me, for years. I wandered those dim hallways, feeling the cold settle over me as I ventured deeper, the weight of old secrets pressing down with every step. And then I found something that made me realize just how much my family had hidden. In a forgotten room, half covered in dust, lay a portrait of a man who looked almost exactly like me. The resemblance was haunting. And his eyes, those eyes stared at me with a warning I couldn't ignore. That night, I learned that sometimes, family history is more than just a story. Sometimes, it reaches out across generations and pulls you in, whether you're ready for it or not. As I stared at the portrait, its chilling familiarity washed over me like a flood of ice. The man's eyes bore into mine, and there was a silent message in them, something I couldn't shake. I knew I had to find out who he was, and what he wanted from me. Walking away from that room wasn't easy. It was as if the eyes followed me down the hallway, pulling me back. But I moved forward, my footsteps echoing off the walls, growing quieter, softer, as if the house itself were swallowing them. The place seemed larger inside than it looked from the outside, and I couldn't help but feel like I'd stumbled into a labyrinth. The air was thick, musty, tinged with something metallic. The scent of old blood. Then, as I reached a large, carved wooden door at the end of the hall, I felt a sudden chill. The air turned cold, biting even, as if winter itself had seeped through the cracks of that ancient doorway. Trembling, I reached for the handle, its brass as cold as ice against my skin. And as I turned it, the door creaked open, leading into a room that seemed lost to time. Inside, the walls were covered with tapestries depicting battles, sacrifices, and rituals I could barely understand. Each stitch seemed to hold a story, a memory. In the corner, a faint glimmer caught my eye. I stepped closer, and there on a small pedestal lay an old, dusty diary. As I flipped through the pages, it became clear, it was a record, written by the man in the portrait. My ancestor. We were cursed, the entry read. This house, this family, bound to something dark. Those who try to leave are brought back, and those who stay, pay a price. Each word seemed to drip with fear, sorrow, and regret, as if he'd been writing from beyond the grave, warning me, begging me not to make the same mistakes. Just as I turned to the final entry, a whisper filled the room. Not from the diary but from the very walls around me. You are one of us now. My heart pounded as I spun around, but the room was empty, still, as if nothing had ever stirred. I left the room in a daze, trying to make sense of it all. My family's past, the curse, the voices, it felt unreal. But as I wandered the hallways, the reality of it settled in. This was no ordinary house. It was a living, breathing thing, filled with the spirits of those who had come before me, trapped in its clutches. I lost track of time. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days. And the whispers, they never stopped. Sometimes they sounded like warnings, other times like mocking laughter, echoing down the corridors as I wandered aimlessly. I came across locked doors, shadowed rooms, and eerie portraits that seemed to change expression every time I looked away. Faces twisted in agony, eyes hollow with despair. Finally, I found myself at the entrance of the basement. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered within, beckoning me down. Every instinct told me to turn around, to leave, but something, maybe the same force that had drawn me to the manor, compelled me forward. The descent was slow, every step a new level of fear. Shadows danced along the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost alive. I felt them pressing in around me, a cold, suffocating presence that grew heavier with every step. At the bottom, I found myself in a large, cavernous space. It looked ancient, far older than the rest of the house, like a crypt that had been hidden for centuries. Strange symbols covered the walls, carved deep into the stone, and in the center of the room stood an altar, draped in tattered cloth and stained with something dark. There, on the altar, lay a book, bound in leather that seemed worn and cracked, like it had seen centuries of hands touch it. The pages were filled with spells, curses, and rituals, each more disturbing than the last. And then I saw it, the ritual that bound my family to the house, a blood pact made generations ago, sealing each descendant to the manor, to suffer its wrath, its hunger. I wanted to leave, to run, but as I turned to go, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was him, the man from the portrait. His eyes met mine, filled with a sorrow so deep it chilled me to my bones. He raised his hand, and in a voice that echoed with years of regret, he whispered, "There is no escape." I stared back at the figure standing in the doorway, barely breathing. His eyes were hollow yet piercing, filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed endless, like he was pleading for some kind of relief. Just when I thought he might speak, he vanished, leaving nothing but cold air and a whisper that seemed to linger. I clutched the old book from the altar, heart pounding. I didn't want to touch it, let alone open it, but an invisible pull urged me onward, as if my own hands were no longer mine. I turned the pages slowly, each one covered in symbols that seemed to writhe and twist as I read. The words, though foreign, filled my mind with meanings, visions of dark rituals, unholy ceremonies, and sacrifices made by ancestors who had given themselves to something unspeakable. The deeper I read, the more a strange realization began to take root. My family hadn't simply been cursed by someone else. They had invited the curse willingly, seeking power and protection from a dark force they barely understood. The pact had demanded a bloodline, a binding of soul after soul to the manor, and in return, it had promised them eternal life. But it was a twisted promise, one that fed on their suffering, trapping them within the walls, neither dead nor alive. A faint creak pulled me out of my trance, snapping my attention to the corner of the basement where shadows seemed to gather and swirl. There, half hidden in darkness, was a staircase I hadn't noticed before. It was narrow and wound down further into the earth, carved from ancient stone. Without even realizing it, I had started walking toward it, the book clutched to my chest like a shield. The descent felt endless, as if I were spiraling into the depths of the earth itself. The air grew colder, thicker, and filled with an almost metallic scent. Shadows flickered along the walls, forming faces, shapes, memories of lives lost. It was as if each step brought me closer to some forbidden truth, a truth buried so deep that even time had forgotten it. At last, I reached the bottom and found myself in a massive underground chamber. The walls were lined with rows upon rows of stone tombs, each marked with a name that echoed through my memory, ancestors, all bound here, trapped for eternity. Some were crumbling, their inscriptions faded by time, but others looked new, disturbingly recent, as if they'd been placed there only yesterday. I froze when I saw the last tomb. It was empty, open, with my own name carved onto it. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I stumbled back, my pulse racing. This was impossible. I hadn't died, hadn't even lived long enough to earn a place here. Yet the inscription was unmistakable, as if the house itself had claimed me before I'd even known it. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, soft and mournful. "You're one of us now. Bound to the house, bound to us." It was the same voice from the portrait, the same man who had appeared in the doorway. His figure seemed to materialize beside the tomb, watching me with a strange mixture of pity and resignation. "You can't escape," he murmured. "No one can. Once you're marked, the house holds you. Even in death, it won't let go." I turned, desperately searching for a way out, but the chamber had shifted. The staircase was gone, replaced by walls that seemed to close in on me. Panic surged through me as I banged on the stone, screaming for someone, anyone to hear me. The walls seemed to breathe, inhaling and exhaling, pressing closer. Shadows danced across the tombs, each one growing darker, more twisted, like the spirits of my ancestors were coming to life, merging with the stone to watch me, trap me. I ran deeper into the chamber, stumbling over loose stones and ancient relics. My only light came from a flickering lantern I'd found on the altar, its weak flame casting strange shapes across the walls. Faces seemed to emerge from the darkness, each one more horrifying than the last, twisted, distorted versions of my own kin, forever bound to this cursed place. Finally, I reached a small, hidden alcove. There, carved into the wall, was an image that took my breath away. It was the same symbol from the book, etched in blood-red stone, a circle surrounding a cross, encased in thorns. This was the mark of the curse, the seal that bound my family to the house. I realized then what I had to do. The only way to break the curse was to destroy the seal. But as I raised my hand to touch it, the ground began to tremble, and a deafening roar filled the chamber. The walls seemed to close in, and from the shadows, shapes began to take form, human figures, pale and ghostly, reaching out toward me with hollow eyes and mouths that twisted in silent screams. I screamed, slamming my fist into the symbol with all the strength I could muster. The walls shook, the tombs cracked, and the ghosts vanished into thin air. For a moment, there was silence, a deep, empty silence that filled the chamber like a dark void. And then, laughter. The laughter reverberated through the chamber, chilling me to the core. It was a deep, guttural sound that felt like it came from the earth itself, echoing in the shadows around me. I backed away from the wall, heart pounding as the laughter grew louder, almost mocking. It was as if the house was celebrating my failure, reveling in the hopelessness that now seeped into my very bones. Then I saw them, the figures of my ancestors emerging from the walls, their faces twisted in agony, but their eyes locked onto me with a strange, pleading look. They were trapped, bound to this place, yet there was a glimmer of something in their gaze. A warning? A plea? Before I could decipher it, the wall trembled again, and cracks began to spiderweb across the chamber, as if the entire structure was about to collapse. Desperately, I searched for a way out. My lantern flickered, casting erratic shadows, and I stumbled over the broken stones, the laughter still echoing in my ears. My ancestors' eyes followed me, and I could feel their sorrow, their regret, mingling with my own panic. I was on the brink of despair when I noticed a small, hidden door at the far end of the chamber. It was barely visible, half hidden by rubble, but a faint light glowed from beneath it. I scrambled toward the door, my fingers scrabbling to push it open. It creaked, revealing a narrow passageway that seemed to stretch on forever. Without looking back, I ran, the laughter fading behind me as the passage closed in, winding deeper into the darkness. The passage twisted and turned, seemingly never-ending. My breathing grew ragged, each step echoing down the tunnel. It was as though the walls were alive, closing in, feeding on the desperation in my soul. I could feel a strange pulse emanating from the walls, almost like a heartbeat, matching the frantic pace of my own. Then, a chill swept through the air, a bitter cold that seemed to seep into my very bones. The darkness ahead was absolute, but I kept moving forward, unwilling to look back. The memory of those shadowy figures in the chamber haunted me, their sorrowful eyes burned into my mind. Whatever lay behind me, I knew I couldn't turn back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a faint glow appeared in the distance. I pushed forward, stumbling toward the light, heart pounding with the faintest hope of escape. As I neared the source, I saw it was another doorway, its frame twisted and decayed, barely holding together. Cautiously, I stepped through, finding myself in what appeared to be an old, abandoned library. Dust-covered books filled towering shelves, their spines cracked and faded with age. The silence here was deafening, almost sacred, but something about it felt wrong. I could sense a presence lurking just out of sight, watching me. A single book lay open on a pedestal in the center of the room, its pages blank except for one line scrawled in shaky handwriting, "Leave while you still can." The warning felt like a final plea, a last attempt to keep me from whatever lay ahead, but I was in too deep to turn back now. With a trembling hand, I reached for the book. The moment my fingers touched the page, the air shifted, growing colder still. The ground beneath me trembled, and a voice, soft, whispering, filled the room, barely audible but impossible to ignore. "You've come this far," it murmured. "Will you risk everything to know the truth?" The question hung heavy in the air. I glanced around, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes upon me, unseen yet palpable. As I stood there, transfixed by the voice, shadows began to creep along the walls, twisting and writhing like living things. The whisper intensified, almost echoing inside my skull, filling my mind with fragments of a story, an ancient tale of betrayal, darkness, and power. Each word pulsed through me, and it felt as though I were being pulled into the very pages of the book itself. Suddenly, a sharp gust of wind blew through the room, scattering the pages around me. The whispers grew louder, circling, layering, each voice sounding more desperate than the last. Then I saw it, a faint figure at the edge of my vision, flickering in and out like a candle flame. They wore tattered clothes, their face hidden in shadows, but their eyes, hollow and endless, filled with a sorrow that seemed to span centuries. I felt compelled to speak, though I wasn't sure if it was my own voice or theirs. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible over the cacophony of whispers. The figure raised a hand, a finger extending to a row of books on a distant shelf. Slowly, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, clear and resolute. "We are the forgotten, bound here, kept from the peace of the beyond." A chill coursed through me as the figure's form grew clearer, their face now inches from mine, ancient and worn, eyes filled with a sorrow beyond words. "You've been chosen to see, to know the secrets we keep hidden," it rasped, each word an exhale of desperation. The room dimmed, shadows merging and reforming around me, until I was no longer in the library but in a dimly lit, foggy expanse. Shadows darted in and out of sight, their faces blurred and mournful, each one echoing the same plea. I knew then that they had been trapped here for reasons I could barely comprehend, each soul bound to the library for eternity. As I took a step back, I stumbled upon a trapdoor hidden beneath a rotting rug. With trembling hands, I lifted it, revealing a narrow, spiraling staircase leading deeper into darkness. The whispers turned into soft, chanting murmurs as I descended, feeling the weight of the lost souls clinging to me, urging me forward. Finally, I reached the bottom, where a single door awaited, carved with strange symbols that seemed to pulse in the dim light. The door creaked open, and I stepped through, finding myself in a vast hall lined with mirrors. Each reflection held a different version of myself, some older, others gaunt and weary, eyes shadowed with untold horrors. In one, I was bleeding, in another I was smiling with a dark satisfaction that chilled me to the core. The whispers quieted, replaced by a single voice that seemed to emanate from every corner of the room. "Make your choice," it said. As I stared into the reflections, each version of myself seemed to beckon with subtle gestures, some urging caution, others displaying twisted smiles that hinted at unspeakable knowledge. They whispered simultaneously, forming a dissonant harmony that clawed at my sanity, each voice seeming to offer a different path, a different fate. The words, "Make your choice," echoed endlessly, bouncing off the walls until it became impossible to tell where the sound was coming from. My heart raced, pounding as if it were trying to escape my chest, and I could feel a darkness closing in. Taking a hesitant step forward, I studied each reflection, hoping for a hint, a clue as to what this choice entailed. My hand hovered over one of the mirrors, my fingertips brushing its cold, glassy surface. As soon as I made contact, the room plunged into darkness, and I felt a force pull me into the mirror. Suddenly, I was standing in a new room, shadowy and silent, with rows of books stretching infinitely in every direction. It looked like the library, but there was something fundamentally wrong, an eerie stillness that hinted this was a place beyond the bounds of time. Here, everything seemed suspended in a perpetual twilight. I felt the heavy presence of the souls lingering, unseen but close enough that their grief and anger pressed against me, a suffocating weight. They were watching, waiting for my next move. In the dim light, I noticed a single book on a pedestal in the center of the room. Its cover was worn, the title unreadable, yet it seemed to throb with a sinister energy. I approached, compelled by an unseen force. My fingers trembled as I reached for the book, hearing faint voices pleading, "Don't, it's too late for you." Ignoring the warning, I opened the book. At once, visions flooded my mind, a horrifying blend of past lives, tragic endings, and sorrowful figures who had made choices that led them here, to eternal imprisonment. Each page was a tale, each tale a reflection of the countless souls bound within this library. The last page bore a single line, "To look beyond this place, you must pay the price." Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder and more desperate, as if each soul was fighting to be heard. Images flashed before my eyes, forgotten memories, twisted faces, moments of heartbreak and betrayal, each more vivid than the last. They were memories I didn't recognize, yet somehow they felt intimately familiar, as though they were remnants of my own forgotten past. A chill crept down my spine as the voice from earlier returned, echoing softly in my mind. "Are you ready to know the truth?" it asked. The library began to shift and warp around me, and I felt myself being drawn further into the dark, into realms and secrets I could barely comprehend. Each step brought me closer to something ancient and unknowable, a truth that defied the limits of sanity. As the shadows deepened, I realized that I had ventured too far to turn back, trapped in the very story I had come to unravel. As the truth loomed before me, I felt each step drag me deeper into a place where reason and reality fractured. The walls of the library shifted, contorting as if alive, closing in, urging me to look inward rather than out. With every inch I progressed, the whispers grew louder, their tones pleading, sorrowful, angry. They swirled around me, each voice telling its own story, each tale reflecting back the moments of my own life I'd buried and forgotten. Finally, I reached a doorway, a simple, unmarked arch of stone that emanated a cold aura. Beyond it lay utter darkness. The whispers stopped, and an oppressive silence filled the air. I hesitated, feeling a weight settle upon me, as if something beyond this threshold could shatter the very essence of who I was. A single step inside, and the darkness enveloped me entirely. But then, faint figures began to emerge from the void, faces I recognized, though they were distorted, warped versions of people I once knew. They were figures from my past, lost friends, past loves, each twisted by the choices that led them here, to the darkness beyond the library. One by one, they turned to face me, eyes hollow yet somehow filled with accusation. Their voices rose, filling the emptiness around me. Each figure recounted their own tale, weaving together a tapestry of lost potential, missed opportunities, betrayals, and decisions that had veered them toward an irreversible fate. I tried to look away, but their eyes bore into me, pulling me into their stories as though each one was my own. Then, one figure stepped forward. I felt a jolt of recognition. It was a reflection of myself, an echo from another time, another life. It wore my face, yet its expression was foreign, filled with regret and grief. "This is where your path leads," it whispered. "If you continue, you will become like us." I felt the weight of its words, the undeniable truth pressing down upon me. Yet, something within me resisted. I couldn't abandon the quest, not after coming so far. I looked past the figures, deeper into the void, sensing that the true revelation lay just beyond them, waiting for me to find the courage to face it. No, that wasn't the end of the story, it was a climax. It was a book they've never noticed before, bound in cracked leather and etched with symbols that seemed to shift with every blink. As their fingers traced the patterns, whispers surge, louder than before, merging into words. They can almost make out a name, a familiar one. The darkness within the library stirs, and the faint glow of candlelight reveals fragments of faces, each one frozen in expressions of despair, anger, or longing. They're people the protagonist recognizes, old friends, a mentor, even a lost love, all seemingly trapped in mid-sentence, mouths open as if cut off mid-scream or declaration. The room feels colder, pressing in, urging the protagonist to open the book. Against every instinct screaming to stop, they turn the cover. A rush of air sweeps past them, and the library warps, shifting like the blending of memories. Each page they turn reveals visions, moments of their life they had long buried, mistakes they'd rather forget, and choices they'd thought were behind them. The scenes play out in unnerving clarity, as though someone had recorded their memories. Yet, as they move deeper, the scenes grow stranger, more distorted. In one, they see themselves arguing with a figure cloaked in shadow, voices echoing but words indistinct. The figure hands them an old-fashioned key, as if urging them to unlock something, but before they can reach out, the vision fades, replaced by darkness. The protagonist is left holding the book alone in the dim light, shivering from the chill and the unmistakable realization, they've uncovered something far more personal and haunting than a history of the library. Suddenly, as the protagonist stands in silence, clutching the book, they feel a cold grip on their shoulder. They whip around, heart pounding, but there's no one there. Shadows seem to crawl closer, filling the room with an overwhelming darkness, pressing in from all sides, as though the walls themselves are alive and watching. The whispers rise again, clearer now, and it dawns on the protagonist that they're chanting, calling their name in unison. Panicked, the protagonist bolts through the maze-like corridors, only to realize that the familiar layout of the library has shifted. The once recognizable paths are distorted, leading them back to the same room, no matter which way they turn. The figures in the shadows draw nearer, whispering secrets and regrets, calling them by name with unsettling familiarity, as though they've known them all their life. Each voice seems to carry a piece of the protagonist's past, weaving memories with fears, intertwining until the lines blur. At last, the protagonist stops in front of an ancient wooden door, one they've never seen before in the library. The door emits a faint, pulsing glow, and a keyhole stares back at them, almost beckoning. They remember the key from the vision in the book, the one handed to them by the shadowed figure. In their pocket, inexplicably, they feel the cool shape of that very key. Trembling, they insert it into the lock, and with a soft click, the door swings open. A blast of cold air greets them, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something old, something decayed. Stepping through the door, they find themselves in a cavernous hall lined with mirrors. Each mirror reflects a version of themselves at different stages in life, youthful and full of hope, middle-aged and regretful, elderly and resigned. But there's something wrong with each reflection, the eyes don't match their own, they're hollow, staring back with an intensity that makes the protagonist's skin crawl. As they step further, one reflection breaks away from the mirror and steps into the hall, followed by another and another. Soon, they're surrounded by these spectral versions of themselves, each one embodying the choices they could have made, the lives they could have lived. The figures begin to speak, voicing regrets and accusations, each memory twisting into something darker, more sinister. Desperate to escape, the protagonist closes their eyes, and when they open them, they're back in the library. The book has vanished, and the room is silent. For a moment, they think it's over, but a chilling realization settles in, they can still hear the whispers, faintly, and they know the shadows are still watching, waiting for the next time they'll be drawn into the library's dark embrace. The protagonist stumbles out of the library, breathing heavily, trying to shake off the feeling of eyes watching their every move. But as they make their way down the dimly lit street, the whispers return, faint at first, like a distant echo in their mind. The streetlights flicker erratically, casting long, twisted shadows along the pavement, stretching and bending in unnatural shapes as if reaching out. Unable to resist, they glance over their shoulder and see something shifting in the shadows, a shape, almost humanoid but impossibly tall and thin, with elongated limbs that reach and curl into the darkness. Paralyzed, they watch as the figure moves silently, gliding just out of reach, mirroring their every step. Each time they turn to look ahead, the figure vanishes, only to reappear a little closer when they glance back again. Their pace quickens, but no matter how fast they walk, the figure keeps pace effortlessly, moving with a fluid, haunting grace. The whispers grow louder, now distinctly murmuring their name in a low, guttural tone that vibrates in their ears. They break into a sprint, desperate to reach the safety of their home, but the street seems to stretch endlessly, with the lights dimming further until the only illumination comes from the pale glow of the figure behind them. Finally, they burst through the door of their home, slamming it shut and locking it tight. They lean against the door, their chest heaving, ears straining for any sound outside. Silence. A sigh of relief escapes them, but it's short-lived. From within the house, they hear a faint scratching sound, a slow, deliberate scrape along the walls, moving closer. They follow the sound, heart pounding, down the darkened hallway and into the living room. The shadows seem thicker here, gathering in the corners, and as they look around, the scratching intensifies. It's coming from inside the walls. Panicked, they back away, but suddenly, a cold hand grabs their shoulder from behind. They spin around, and there, standing in the center of the room, is the same shadowed figure from the street, now fully formed and watching them with hollow, soulless eyes. Frozen in terror, they stare as the figure reaches out, its fingers stretching and elongating until they're inches from the protagonist's face. A deep, raspy voice whispers, "Welcome home," as the figure merges with the shadows, disappearing into the darkness. Shaking, they collapse onto the floor, clutching their head as the whispers continue, louder than ever, filling their mind with dark promises and memories they don't remember living. They realize, with dawning horror, that the shadow hasn't left, it's inside them now, a part of them. The whispers will never stop, and as they sit in the darkness, they know they will never truly be alone again. After that haunting final message, the camera cuts to the protagonist, now sitting in a dim room, haunted by the knowledge of what they carry. The whispers linger, quieter but constant, a steady presence that they've come to accept. Their eyes are darker, shadowed by sleepless nights and haunted memories that don't quite belong to them. Every flicker of shadow in the corner of the room, every creak and whisper, is a reminder of the being that now shares their mind. As they go about their daily life, they're no longer alone. The shadow manifests in small, unsettling ways, flickers of movement that only they can see, reflections that show two figures instead of one, voices that murmur dark secrets from corners. Their friends and family notice the change, their once lively eyes now carrying an eerie stillness, as if something else stares out from within. Desperate for peace, the protagonist delves into researching ancient rituals and lore, hoping for a way to separate themselves from the shadow. They uncover stories of others who've encountered similar hauntings, but each account ends with despair, resignation, or, worse, disappearance. Every lead takes them deeper into darkness, with no escape in sight. One night, as the protagonist performs a desperate ritual under the light of a full moon, they feel the shadow growing stronger within them, pushing against their skin as though it's trying to break free. The air grows thick, heavy with an unseen presence, and the room chills to an unnatural cold. The shadow's whispers grow louder, mingling with their own thoughts, creating a cacophony of voices until they can't distinguish which is their own. Just as they're about to give up, a revelation hits them: they've been going about this the wrong way. Instead of fighting the shadow, they need to accept it, to allow it to coexist rather than resist. It's a terrifying realization, but it's their only option. Slowly, they stop resisting, letting the shadow seep deeper into their mind, accepting its presence. The room warms, the whispers soften, and for the first time in months, there's silence. Yet, the ending remains unsettling. They are no longer fully themselves, forever changed by the entity that now lives within. Their reflection occasionally flickers with another face, a dark, hollow-eyed figure that watches with a knowing gaze. They've survived, but at a cost. The person they once were is gone, leaving a haunted soul behind. As the story reaches its haunting conclusion, we leave the mysteries lingering in the shadows of this eerie tale. What do you think really happened that night? How would you have handled a fate like that? Share your thoughts in the comments below, we'd love to hear your theories. And if you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Each week, we bring you chilling tales from the edge of the unknown, waiting to keep you up at night. Thanks for watching Mr. Nightfall, and we'll see you in the next story, if you dare.